In episode 17 of season 6 of The Office, The Delivery, the existence of a dangerous criminal at large called the Scranton Strangler is shown for the first time in a newspaper headline. Someone who, as we would later learn, strangled his victims until they passed out, so most people had never seen his face. I know very well that a serial killer sounds extremely out of place for the plot of a comedy as absurd and funny as The Office, and it might seem like it's just another awkward joke that we're so used to, but the references to him don't stop there. Because in the same season, in the episode Happy Hour, people keep discussing how they can defend themselves from him. And even in body language, Dwight makes a joke about calling 911 to report a sighting of him. And it doesn't just stay in that season. In fact, it's a small piece of continuity that follows the series all the way to its end in season 9. Being a mystery that's constantly referenced, developed, and even solved in quotes. Well, even though we see his capture on screen, one of the characters seems to have taken part in his imprisonment, and it's an event that's talked about later on, so case closed, right? Well, if it were that simple, this Titanic video wouldn't exist. Anyone who has seen these seasons will notice something very quickly, aside from how bad they are compared to the first ones, and that is, despite what television seems to say repeatedly, the mystery hasn't been completely solved, and even certain characters seem to act in a way. When uneasy, this comes up again. That's why the idea has become popular, that not only may they have never caught the real Strangler, but he could also be inside the very offices of Dunder Mifflin. What you're about to see, this is a complex investigation that includes multiple sources and perspectives from different theories over the years, official material from the series itself, companion podcasts, interviews, and discussion threads, not only to explore every possible scenario of this mystery, but also to analyze each one of the suspects and finally discover once and for all who is the culprit or culprits behind the most atrocious crime spree in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Yes, few mysteries are as fascinating as that of the Scranton Strangler. For years, fans have analyzed glances, awkward silences, and even theories on Reddit because, even in an office comedy, the little details matter, and that's what's interesting. The thing that grabs us the most isn't always the main story, but the details like gestures, the backgrounds, the posters on the wall, the atmosphere. Suspect number 1, Toby Flenderson. Let's start with the most popular idea, and therefore the most boring one. Toby. In the show, he's a shy, repressed man with a frankly pathetic life. He's a divorced man whose daughter and ex-wife don't respect him.
Toby is in HR, which technically means he works for corporate, so he's really not a part of our family. Also, he's divorced, so he's really not a part of his family.
At work, it's not any better, with his boss consistently wanting to keep him as far away from him as possible.
Not now, Toby. My God, get the hell out of here, idiot.
What do? Treating him like the worst thing that's ever happened to the office. An idea that slowly starts to spread to the rest of the team. Or at least, that's how it seems in the first seasons. Because slowly, Toby seems to get fed up with this, and wants to be someone more confident, chasing his dream of writing mystery novels. But, above all, to become someone who, at the very least, people don't walk all over. We can see that with the story arc in the 3rd season, where, with Pam being single, he pretends that he could finally go out with her and spends several episodes looking for the chance to ask her out, taking too long, so Jim wins her back. Which, yes, hurts him, but he doesn't seem to have given up since he immediately looks for any opportunity to be recognized or liked by his team. Humiliating Jim, he takes the opportunity without thinking, to the point that he even put his hand on Pam's leg, an act that, as we know, doesn't end well. From here, Toby decides to continue with his self-improvement plans, going to Costa Rica only to be humiliated again, just one day after arriving there. And after his brief retreat, one of the first things he does when he returns is give Jim and Pam a warning for being too physical, clearly out of jealousy. Action. Believe it or not, this tells us a lot about Toby's character, someone who tends to make erratic decisions out of nowhere, holding a certain resentment toward people who treat him badly. Also, he seems to have that drive to achieve what he set out to do, to be respected and liked. And he has a curious fixation with being part of a detective novel, so it's extremely interesting that the first mention of the Scranton Strangler happens right when Jim and Pam have their first child, a point that Quinn McLaren mentions in his conspiracy theory, and that I didn't notice in all the times I rewatched that episode, is that even though we see Toby at the beginning of the birth episode, he's absent when everyone is ready to welcome the baby. And what does the newspaper say the next day? The Scranton Strangler, a man who doesn't And this isn't the only moment when Toby is noticeably absent. In Season 7, where we see the chase, and with this, the only time we have real confirmation of the appearance of the Strangler's relationship with his vehicle, it's a blue car, which matches those we've seen around the parking lot throughout the series. And obviously, Toby wasn't there while everyone was watching the chase. This is where I need to quote another one of the articles I researched. Well, it's mentioned how, during the chase, Toby's phone rang in his office, but Kelly picked it up for just a few seconds and then hung up abruptly. Screen Rant suggests that, precisely because of how calls work in the offices, the person who called knew Toby's exact extension. So one theory is that at that moment he wanted to contact his coworkers and reveal himself in an exaggerated way, like the crime novel villain he imagined himself to be, only to have the call suddenly cut off. A bit of bad luck that seems typical for him. In that same season, where everyone goes to Jim and Pam's baptism, Toby is absent again, and while we can't rule out that there might be some kind of jealousy between them, what's interesting is that, at the end of the episode, he explains exactly why this happens. Because he doesn't go, mentioning that there are certain problems between the guy upstairs and him. Toby comes in after everyone else has left and asks, "Why are you always so cruel to me?" Which, if we get a little conspiratorial, could sound like a justification for a criminal mind, and how reluctant he is to enter the church could be seen as a confession of the enormous guilt he feels for his horrible actions. And really, if it's not because of the murders, what else could Toby feel guilty about? Fulfilling his dream of being part of a detective story, Toby ends up being part of the jury that will determine the fate of George Howard Scubb, the person the police identified as the Strangler. The thing is that after finally being involved in a complex case, Flenderson seemed to doubt Scubb's guilt, constantly wondering if he could be innocent. Of course, this could have come from his obsession with detective stories, but he seemed to say it so naturally that it seemed suspicious. And above all, there's the moment when his boss, the man he may hate most of all, mocks Toby for saying that the office air is almost toxic and a silent killer, responding that Toby is the silent killer. Toby just looks at the camera sarcastically and only replies, "You'll see." Now all of this seems to paint a pretty definitive and convincing picture, with Toby being the real Strangler. To the point where the office's own YouTube channel released a fake documentary parodying those about other serial killers trying to link these two. But we only have one problem. And that's because, since the show ended, multiple cast members have confirmed that we're looking in the wrong direction. For example, in the Office Ladies podcast, hosted by the actresses who played Angela and Pam, where they discuss production secrets, episode trivia, and some pretty accurate fun facts. There, they specifically decided to talk about this topic, but the thing is, they said this.
Angela, you yourself pointed out that in Season 1, Toby has a photo of a Jeep at his desk. In Season 2,
you're doing what I did.
You're quoting from our own podcast.
Judge, slight objection, but I'll allow it.
Thank you. In Season 2, episode Take Your Daughter to Work Day, Toby drives a silver Saab. And then in Season 8, The Garden Party, he's driving a Subaru Impreza. None of the Dunder Mifflin staff are ever seen driving this Mercury Cougar that is at the center of the Strangler case. This would mean that Toby, our underpaid HR rep, somehow has two cars, a Strangler car and another car? I doubt that is the case. In Dwight's Christmas, Toby is recounting his theories about the Scranton Strangler to Tonelli. He mentions that they found fingerprints, presumably linked to George Howard Scubb. How did George Howard Scubb's fingerprints get on coins found at one of the crime scenes if he's not the Scranton Strangler? Okay. You might notice that none of Toby's fingerprints were found at any of the crime scenes. And if they were, we would know about it because he has traveled abroad. And it is customary to provide fingerprints in order to obtain a passport. So clearly Toby's fingerprints have been cleared. And while Toby might doubt the validity of these fingerprints as being accurate, there have been many cases of police being able to lift fingerprints from money and get convictions, just like they did in this case. Because criminals often think to wear gloves while committing a crime, but not when handling their own money. And finally, I would say that the fact that George Howard Scub tries to strangle Toby during his visit to the prison is pretty clear evidence that George Howard Scub is the Strangler. But now, I'd like to go to character consistency. Per the FBI, psychopaths who commit serial murder do not value human life and are extremely callous in their interactions with their victims. One strategy to assess whether a person is a psychopath is to look at 4 dimensions: deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger, collectively known as the 4 Ds. Toby's character is largely depicted as mild-mannered and empathetic, making it difficult to believe that he is a serial killer. Ellen Kay from Robinson, Illinois said, "I don't think serial killers participate in Movember." I would also like to quote Jenna F. from Los Angeles, who said, "Why would Toby be so worried about us all dying of radon poisoning if he was the Scranton Strangler? Wouldn't he want us all to slowly suffocate?" That sounds like the perfect crime.
But well, they're just actresses. I think it's possible they don't have a completely accurate idea of where the characters' storylines would go. So the best answer to this mystery comes from Paul Lieberstein, the actor who played Toby, but also one of the main writers and producers of the series in its early seasons. And he said the following: "Dookie,
Do you think he was the Strangler?
I don't know. There's a world where he was the Strangler. Maybe one where he wasn't. Maybe there's 2 Stranglers.
Oh.
3. The one thing the Strangler did was he strangled people but didn't kill them. He left after they were strangled and unconscious.
Is that true?"
Yes, I didn't know. I don't think we ever actually said it. But that was always our thing. The Scranton Strangler didn't kill you. Wow. So I thought, yeah, that does sound like Toby now.
And yes, if you're wondering, in all the interviews where they ask him that, it's always like, how ambiguous. But here, I present a very interesting idea that, despite what we've believed for years, there was never a real death attributed to the Strangler, so all these suspects aren't really murderers. And also, he may not have acted alone. Following those mystery novels, there's usually a character who serves to distract the audience from the real culprit. So Toby might use that as part of his modus operandi, if he is the Strangler. And I mean, the crimes really make more sense if we consider that, to do everything so effectively, there must have been at least 2 people. A twist worthy of a great mystery. So, what other people in the office could be dangerous enough to earn such a title? Suspect number 2, Dwight Schrute. For everyone who has seen the show, seeing his name here might seem strange. Yes, he's a sadistic and unbalanced man, but he greatly respects his workspace and even considers it his mission in life, along with his hero delusions. Besides, he himself is one of the people trying to catch that mysterious criminal. The problem is that, in many ways, Dwight talks too much about the criminal to not take it seriously, joking about it and even dressing up as him on Halloween. It's curious, since he seems to be someone who overreacts to any kind of criminal activity, organizing multiple types of patrols against other criminals, serials, like the one who exposed himself to women in the parking lot, or conducting a full raid against what seemed to be a single joint of weed. However, this would also ignore several of the more sadistic tendencies he shows throughout the series, like having sharp weapons in the office and being ready to get into a fight with anyone who crosses his path. This is very important for our investigation today, and we also can't forget about his farm. Having this farm gives him the perfect excuse to have a bunch of skills, and very suspicious ones at that. And we've seen that Dwight knows how to skin animals, hunt them, butcher them, and even bury them, as was explained in the episode Doomsday, when he asked for help to dig a grave for horses. But, just as the user Faye Fagesim mentioned, this is kind of strange because he always says that his horses are mostly used for food, along with his constant childhood stories, mentioning that, since they lived in poverty, they didn't leave anything of the animal after eating it. So why would he need all those skills? Dwight has said he thinks there are too many people in the world, a belief possibly shaped by his farm experience, where they don't need many animals. I'd like to add this to the fact that this isn't the only mention of his strange digging hobby, since it comes up again in another episode where he says he has $30,000 buried for emergencies, but he doesn't want to dig under a certain someone to get it. Why? Is it because the money is hidden under a body? This could easily be interpreted as, I don't know, inheritance money, but if we consider how he had no problem digging up his own grandfather to steal his suit, maybe that someone he buried the money with isn't part of his family tree. But before we continue, why would a man this rigid and honorable, even if it's in his strange and psychotic way, be a criminal? Well, we know that Dwight has always been a sycophant, even if it's not something he likes to admit, seeking Michael's approval and pretending to follow the rules to an exaggerated and obsessive degree. The problem is that, even though he holds all his colleagues to impossible standards to maintain those rules, Dwight is fundamentally a hypocrite. And this is pretty obvious if you pay attention to his character. I have to remind you that he's the family man who would do anything to settle down with someone, only to start an affair a season later because he was feeling needy. It seems like he lives by the motto that rules are very important, but they don't necessarily apply to him, which could be very problematic if he goes from thinking that about his workplace rules to thinking that about the laws of society. On the other hand, Dwight even believes that he has hunted werewolves and vampires. He thinks he can change his body to do whatever he wants, and many other things. So it's not crazy to think that if his strange mind tells him someone is a threat, he'll do everything possible to eliminate them. And do you know how he usually gets rid of the animals on the farm?
Chickens on the Scranton Strangler.
By asphyxiating them. In fact, within the series we can see several moments where Dwight strangles people, which seems to be a vital part of his fighting arsenal. In the episode New Leads, the victim is Kevin, and Dwight seems to be someone with a lot of experience in that, in addition to the fact that he has costumes for absolutely everyone in the office. So even if people thought it was Toby, it's possible that he could have disguised himself as basically any of the other suspects. And he even seems to know how to hide a corpse, something revealed in the episode Survivor Man. And if none of this convinces you, going back to the original post, in at least one episode, his password is Scranton Strangler 666, the Scranton Strangler 666 in Spanish. So it seems like absolutely everything fits to make him a strong candidate, if it weren't for one small problem. The same actor who plays Dwight doesn't think he's the Strangler. Oh.
Definitely Toby.
Now, I know this would seem to completely throw out everything we've mentioned so far, and well, it would. A waste of time if it weren't powerful for an incredibly important detail. Interrogating Dwight is incredibly simple, and you just have to slightly contradict him so that when he tries to correct you, he shows you all of that: his weapons, techniques, law, plans, and experience. So anyone who finds the motivation to commit these crimes could have gotten the information directly from him. Whoever did it would unknowingly become an accomplice, making any other candidate on this list more plausible. And it would only be worse if, say, you didn't need any of that information. Information in first suspect number 3 Creed Bratton. Let's be honest, if Toby didn't exist, we'd all agree that Creed would be the main suspect. A real confirmed criminal who has done absolutely everything the Strangler is suspected of, because that's one of the least shady things this man has in his arsenal. Shout out to the guy who comments on every video asking for one about the job Creed was offering Jem. He seems to be guilty of murder, high-profile robberies, identity theft, and residency fraud. Subscribe, so fight. Jesse Pigman. Among other things and rumors, it seems that this crazy lunatic is real, really dangerous. I'm really curious. Despite how much we know about him, many of the investigations on the subject seem to want to completely dismiss him from the discussion. This might not seem so far-fetched, considering Creed often brags about his actions in front of the cameras, that all that mountain of evidence ends up getting him imprisoned. And besides, there's the fact that it was precisely Creed who was the only person who, off-camera, did this when asked about the mystery. And not only that, when a fan on Instagram commented their theory that both he and Toby could supposedly be behind the crimes, he directly confirmed it. Finally, someone got it and found out. Congratulations. Yes, he and I were a team. And as if that wasn't enough, there's an episode where we know that, on camera, Creed killed someone. He shows up at the office covered in blood, surprised that no one said anything to him, because he didn't know it was Halloween. And by the way, that was never explained in the show, not until 7 years ago in an interview with BuzzFeed.
I was at the trial when Toby was up there testifying, with blood all over me, with the parents of the victims and the bereaved, the press. No one even noticed me. No one saw me there. No one paid any attention. They got the wrong guy.
So was Creed, the Scranton Strangler.
Next question, please.
Okay, now it seems like there's no way Creed isn't the Scranton Strangler. But what kind of investigator would I be if I just said that the guy we all know is a known criminal in the show is a criminal in the show? The real question is whether this criminal is the same one we've been talking about throughout this whole video, and that's where it gets interesting. First of all, we know that he's capable of taking someone's life, or at the very least, it's implied. In multiple seasons, he mentioned that not only was he part of a large number of cults, both as a follower and as a leader, but maybe some of these cults were also suicidal. So looking at it in the kindest way, he might have been behind multiple deaths. But don't worry, it's in the episode Murder. As part of a game, Michael tells Creed that a murder has been committed, and his response is to escape the scene as quickly as possible in his car. According to an interview with the Rolling Stone, there was a body in the trunk of that car. And then, there's episode 24 of season 6 when he was paid to scare Andy, where he gives us this gem of a line.
So there I am, minding my own business. And Darnell offers me $3. All I have to do is walk by Andy and do this. Darnell's a chump. I would have done it for anything. I've done a lot more for a lot less.
Added to the fact that when Dwight brought police officers to the office, Creed locked himself in the confession room to avoid questioning. But maybe the thing that connects and confirms it the most is the first mention of the Strangler. There's a deleted scene that was added back in the extended version of the episode, which incriminates him even more, since he says,
And if I understand anything about the cycle of life, and I do, that means somebody dies. I think we all know the episode has committed to escaping. I want in the chapter, wish me luck, my friends, as I go gently into that good night.
And after that night, the newspaper reports that the Scranton Strangler strikes again. Now, the scene is followed by another one where Creed himself said he was happy to still be alive and that death can't stop him. So it seems like he suspected his own death that night. But it could also be interpreted as him seeing a sign from fate to finally tie up some loose ends, taking a victim and connecting it to the Strangler. I mean, in the end, with everything they've shown us about him, it's not hard to imagine that there must still be someone just as bad with whom he has unfinished business. That angle could fill in some of the more obvious holes in the theory. Well, even though Paul said that the Strangler didn't kill, which remains true, that doesn't rule out the possibility that originally, several of Creed's crimes were attributed to an alleged serial killer, while searching for a pattern which was eventually discovered and copied by Toby. Because in the end, if they found out where he worked, it's easier for them to take away the senile serial killer who's already there, and leave alone the quiet and calm HR worker whom absolutely no one suspects. In fact, that adds a very interesting angle that allows Creed himself to never know that he's the one they're looking for. He never called himself the Strangler, so the fact that there's another guy taking the credit is perfect, because it makes it harder to track him down, which we've seen throughout the series, because he doesn't care if it happens. Well, if he was able to blame an innocent woman for a crisis in the company that he caused, I don't think his conscience would make him feel bad if someone else goes to jail for crimes he committed, which opens up a very interesting possibility. Not only could any guy who decides to take up the mantle of the Strangler be a different person, but Creed, in theory, could be the original one. One who did kill, who did strangle, but in crimes unrelated to those of the Scranton Strangler, and rather tied to his usual criminal misdeeds, completely detaching himself from the investigation since he never knew the culprit, so why would he care? The best part of all this is that it doesn't contradict any additional information that has been presented since then. But before we start putting together this global picture of everything surrounding the Strangler, there are two characters who, having been introduced late, don't seem to be remembered by everyone. But I do remember them. I always remember. Suspect number 4, Gabe. We all remember Gabe, right? Yeah, Gabe isn't exactly a very popular suspect, since for a lot of people his appearance marks the beginning of the end of the show's quality, and because of his even more awkward personality, he doesn't really have many fans. However, there are a lot of coincidences that are impossible to ignore. From here on, it really depends on whether you think the killer has been operating for a few months, a few weeks, or just a few days. But the thing is, Gabe presented a version that was much more disconnected from all the other theories, to the point that, if you come to believe the Strangler was just one person, he could make sense. Let's start with the basics. Almost anything that applies to Toby also applies to Gabe, since he is also a character who is mocked by absolutely all his coworkers, whether it's because of his thinness, the way he speaks, or simply because he doesn't fit in. The Scranton office has always given him the cold shoulder. In fact, and interestingly, at the end of the series, there's a beautiful mural that features all the characters from the show, a mural created by Pam, including others from the later seasons who aren't as loved or remembered, but interestingly, it leaves out Gabe. Maybe because she likes him less than stomach flu. Similar to Toby, he also has a certain fascination with the occult and the macabre, but instead of wanting to be a detective and catch criminals, Gabe gravitates toward horror movies and killers. Funny thing is, when we were shown his passion project, a strange footage that contained pretty twisted images, we can see how he got into Stanley's car, apparently following him to his house without being recognized. This isn't the only sign of his darker side, shown in a strong obsession with Erin, the receptionist, with whom he shared a brief romance that didn't end in the best way. I mean, he followed her into the ladies' bathroom to talk to her, breaking a very important company rule like it was nothing, and without any consequences, thanks to his position, which he uses again to threaten Andy, whom he blames for the breakup, and it's not just any silly threat. He says,
"Say you don't want to get on my dad's side. I've seen some horrible things. I own over 200 R-rated movies, okay?"
That sounds like he's threatening to do to him the horrible things he sees in his horror movies. And yes, they are horrible things, because in the dialogue where he describes one of his favorite movies to Erin, he talks about Suspiria, an Italian movie from 1977, which, to put it in terms that hopefully won't get banned by YouTube, let's hope he doesn't want to do any of that to Andy. That, added to the fact that the strangling started just after Gabe was introduced in the middle of Season 6, gives us a lot to think about. Physically speaking, it's not crazy to think he could be the Strangler either, since in episode 23 of Season 8 Turf War, Jim has Gabe compete against Dwight, one of the most physically capable people in the series. And surprisingly, Gabe doesn't fall that far behind, despite his thinness. In fact, with a long body and big hands, he'd be perfect for strangling, and the type of person who never finishes what he starts. Because of this personality, the main idea is that Gabe really isn't a criminal mastermind, but rather someone who, even though maybe at some point wanted to be the next dangerous killer in town, actually never ends up killing anyone. Something that fits his character very well. Someone who, out of ineptitude, could even let an innocent person go to jail. And maybe Toby, being more familiar with judicial investigations, could discover that something just doesn't add up. This theory would strongly support the idea of a single strangler in a much cleaner way than the others, but I understand if it's not that convincing. The real reason we're talking about this is that the sudden appearance of such a perfect candidate at such a convenient moment could be a distraction from another suspect we've ignored all this time. Suspect number, okay, Robert, California. Okay, even if this guy were someone completely innocent, I think we're all sure that he has very strange behaviors. Something I need to make clear before we start getting into his character is that, even though his first appearance was pretty late in Season 7, it's implied that this guy has lived in Scranton for a while, which means he's existed as an extra off-camera throughout all the seasons of the show. But at this point in the video, about to reveal a new person, I know all of you must be wondering, how could we even consider that this guy could be a candidate? Well, on the Office Ladies podcast, in the same episode where both of them talked about their personal theories about the Strangler, Jenna Fisher, the actress who plays Pam, mentioned what Greg Daniels' personal theory is, the creator of the show, which he revealed at a panel during the show's convention.
Greg Daniels said if the Scranton Strangler was anyone else, it would be none other than Robert, California. And my friends, if anyone possesses the 4 Ds of deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger, Who else could it be? I am Robert California.
It's worth mentioning that neither TV Nada nor I found any record of him saying that, and for now we have to take Jenna Fischer's word for it, which is still just as good because so far the podcast has been a pretty reliable source of information. But just in case, if anyone finds the source, we would be very grateful. The thing is, even if it doesn't seem like it, this could be a character just as mysterious and suspicious as Creed himself. I think the best proof is precisely in the episode of Turf War, where Andy and he come into conflict. The guy says that he won't allow himself to be threatened by anyone, acting with absolute confidence in this situation, and even ending with, "You don't even know my real name." In fact, this isn't the only time they play with the fact that we don't know his identity, since in another episode, when he introduces himself to someone undesirable, he changes his name to Bob Kazamakis, without any explanation. The thing is, that exaggerated confidence isn't just exaggerated confidence. He seems to be successful at his job, and maybe at everything he sets his mind to, having multiple important contacts for anything he needs. This is because he's someone who doesn't even need this job, showing himself to be overqualified during his interview. Which leaves the question, why would someone like that decide to work at such a small, failing place? At least at this point in the show. Well, from the beginning we see that he's someone manipulative, who enjoys getting into people's heads, and changes what he says just to keep having power. And if we add the possibility that he's the Strangler to the equation, the picture gets a lot broader. It turns out that Robert's presence on this list presents an angle that absolutely no other candidate offers, the erotic one. In episode 22 of season 8, he mentions that he hates ties, that they make him feel like part of, and I quote, "an erotic asphyxiation sex club," which is basically what it sounds like, a sexual practice where a person uses asphyxiation to reach climax, strangling themselves in different ways. And Robert seems to know a place where they practice it, even giving directions on how to get there. In fact, he is the only character that the show itself seems to associate with auto-asphyxiation, since in Doomsday Dwight comments, "There's no way he hasn't strangled a stripper." Sex, in fact, is an extremely important aspect for him, using it to present his business vision.
There is only sex. Everything is sex.
Or when his team is fighting and he needs to show his leadership skills, he uses sexual metaphors again, where he even lets us see that for him, even sex isn't just about that.
Life is sex. And all sex is competition. And there are no rules to that game.
It's a type of thinking demonstrated at multiple moments in the series, and although they never really get into exactly what he likes, he seems to be a man of complex desires, quote-unquote, which currently he finds difficult to fulfill due to his status as a married man. As was shown in episode 12 of season 8 Pool Party, he invites the guys from the office to his house, a luxurious place which was bought as a venue for his parties and wild celebrations, which is now a family home, and that makes him incredibly frustrated. This whole episode is about him constantly talking about the life he doesn't have now as a family man, saying that he would have liked to live a crazy hedonistic life full of excess and debauchery, something that could have ended his marriage, as despite having a wife and son during the season and his latest appearances, he goes through a divorce that leaves him depressed. In this version of events, Robert California is a man who lives in a city, but exists off-camera, and he has grown both in his personal and professional life, using his great business skills and other big things to live a wild life that comes to a halt when he cheats on his ex-wife with the woman who later becomes his partner. They have a child together, which turns his whole idea of a hedonistic future into a family life he doesn't appreciate. So he starts looking to vent with other women who are attracted to his successful life. So they let him go far, even trying very experimental things like asphyxiation. In this context, the worst part is that this could fit exactly with the description that the Strangler doesn't kill, because as part of the act, he's not trying to finish them off, but to finish himself. Knowing him, he might have done it without warning, so his partners could think he tried to take their lives. Report it and have it filed as an attempted homicide by a strangler who leaves his victims unconscious. Robert, since he's someone with enormous and illegal connections, could get someone to put him in jail and silence the media. We know very well that there are people who provide this kind of service. So, since Toby found that some things just didn't fit the profile of the Strangler, he starts to uncover this conspiracy. So, when he talks to Howard Scobb strangles him to avoid losing the fourth alibi they had agreed on, keeping the real culprit free to continue committing his crimes. So, which one of these is the real Strangler? Well, a big problem is that there is clearly a huge disconnect between the writers, the actors, and the producers of the show. Well, they all have a different answer. It seems that, no matter what your theory is, the truth is that all the evidence seems to contradict all the other evidence. However, I think we found a more direct and clear answer, having done such a thorough analysis in the first place. First of all, the only two people who seem to be completely disconnected from the case, because their evidence is mostly circumstantial, would be Gabe Lewis and Dwight. At least in Dwight's case, I don't think he's really innocent. I mean, the guy is crazy. But I think these two guys don't affect the Scranton Strangler story in a positive or negative way, since their motives don't align and they don't seem to act so methodically out of anger. Even though they are extremely dangerous people, they're just not directly the Strangler. They may have indirectly given him ideas. If we looked at this in isolation, thinking that the Strangler acted alone and without help, my money would be on Robert, California. He's really the only person with the power, resources, and twisted motivation to get involved in this situation on his own in the first place. And even the weird fact that the show's biggest mystery ends up being a huge sex joke about a cheater-turned-hypersexual serial strangler fits perfectly with the humor of The Office. I feel like fans have ignored the evidence because this is a character who wasn't there from the beginning. And he's not as iconic as the original cast, plus he was part of the seasons that many consider bad. So he could have gone unnoticed just as the real Strangler would have wanted, leaving as mysteriously as he came after having manipulated the entire office. But I know you didn't come for that answer, and I think it actually has to do with Toby and Creed, although not in the way you expect. First of all, I'd like to say that even though Robert is the strongest candidate, he couldn't have worked within a team. He's too volatile and proud, and with such individual motivations, it's impossible to think that he and Creed, for example, are attacking people together. So if we consider that the Strangler is really a team, Robert is out of the running, so it's Toby and Creed, right? Right? Well, I don't think Toby is at all someone capable of committing or sustaining crimes like that. Mostly because, in the moments where we see him try to do something bad or even brave, it goes wrong for him. So I feel like it's a leap in logic to say that he's capable of doing all this without getting caught or suspected. It just doesn't fit with what we see in the show, because we're looking for someone who's really competent. I also think people misunderstand the whole Toby and mystery novel segment. Clearly it's a clue, but it's a misinterpretation to think that Toby is seen as the criminal. He really wants to be the handsome, confident, and strong detective who solves the case. Along with this, if advertising is just as useless in The Office as it is in real life, it's more plausible that Toby would decide to put on his detective hat to live out his fantasies of solving a mystery. Thinking that way, he'd begin investigating the Strangler case himself. In fact, the reason he's not present in important scenes like the baby's birth is probably because he sneaks away to investigate this mystery. Now, I'm sure that in this case, the killer would be Creed, since we have dates of his attacks, motives, and he's someone who physically looks capable of carrying them out, even being arrested at the end of the series. Besides, his actor has confirmed it, and all of this would give an answer to a very interesting question. Not only do they barely have any lines with each other, as if Creed were avoiding Toby, but Creed also acts more and more childishly. This change becomes more noticeable each time Toby talks about how invested he is in the case. So it could be that he tried to appear incompetent so that, while Toby was discovering that the person he incriminated was innocent, Creed wouldn't be found out. Even if Scobb was in prison, Creed still needed to prove his innocence, so it's not hard to see how, with contacts in the prison, he could have threatened him to keep up the act by strangling Toby. Something that not only looks like confirmation, but is also a threat to make Toby stop investigating. Something that, in fact, works. This way, the Strangler gains a couple more months of freedom. Some fans comment that when Creed is arrested, he doesn't look nervous or embarrassed at all. as if he was sure that whatever they took him for probably isn't even the tip of the iceberg of his crimes. In the end, what's one more? Under this logic, the crimes attributed to the Strangler might simply be part of all of Creed's crimes. And he might not just be a simple serial strangler, but the psychopath we all know leaves such a trail of destruction in his wake that the police attributed several of those misdeeds to the same person. And who knows, maybe Robert California was also out there erotically asphyxiating anyone he came across, making the Strangler actually two people at the same time, but without being a team of criminals or anything like that. And all this while Toby was trying to track them down, without realizing that he was becoming the #1 suspect in the whole case. Although here at Null, we already think he's not. So I hope you enjoyed this conspiratorial investigative video. Give it a like if you did, and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in the next video. Goodbye.